Hi, I'm Mario Mancini, former WWE wrestler and first inductee into the 2014 New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. When I want my wrestling news, I watch the Squared Circle.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are live on the Squared Circle. It is June 22nd. It is a hot, sunny summer day.
July.
That party I was at over the weekend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
I'm still just messed up from it. I don't know. July 22nd. I stand corrected. I'm not always wrong. But when I do, I admit it.
There we go.
There we go. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yep.
We are on the heels of, I think, they just keep getting more boring and more boring and more boring. The minor WWE pay-per-views, once again, another squash battleground. Not very good, folks.
Yeah. Forgot to tell us our names. Who we're sitting here
They
with.
should know.
Well, this gentleman here.
And this gentleman over here, we will get to him in just a second. All right. Let us introduce Mr. John Zimmerman.
Of course.
Mr. Thunderous Tom Dacey.
Back finally.
Back finally, once again. This man is an independent wrestling legend here. He's gracing us with his presence, Mr. Bulldog Blanski.
Thank you, thank you.
We're going to have a lot of
The
stories.
thunderous applause is so overwhelming in the studio. The fans are literally falling asleep.
Yep. There we go.
The sold out audience. Look at this big audience we have, as you know.
More than TNA.
I have to tell you, this is probably the first live television show I've done since the old days over at, what was it, Comcast over
Yeah.
there?
21 in Brantford.
Channel
Yeah, Channel 21 in Brantford.
Wow.
I think that was the last live talk show I remember doing. So it's been a long time.
PWI back in the day.
It's been over 15, 16 years, I think, since the last time I did a live show.
Well, we are definitely honored to have you.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. It's kind of it's kind of nice to come on and reminisce with some old friends.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, I envy this man right here.
How so?
He had the honor of walking to the ring with the Godfather's hose.
Oh,
We did so much walking. If you want to know the short story, I'll give you the story now, or do you want to give you news first?
Let's hear the story first.
I think the story's going to be more interesting.
Yeah.
You know, if you would have asked me this 20 years ago, I'd probably tell you the story. But in the age of non-kayfabe now, you know, coming up as an independent guy in Connecticut, you know, it was very hard at that particular time in the late 90s for a lot of us that were trying to come up to try and make it big. I know we briefly talked about it backstage. There were guys like myself, Ron Zombie, Rex Lethal, Noodles Nixon, Curtis Slam Dog, the Mercenary. I'm trying to think of some of the Connecticut guys at that time, and if I forgot anyone, forgive me. I was just very fortunate to happen to be in the right place at the right time when I had gotten the call. I was at my home in Brantford at the time, and I remember Raw was coming into the Coliseum. And like most of us, you know, the Coliseum was where we all kind of grew up watching wrestling,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
And as a small child, my father would take me there. And I remember seeing guys like Andre the Giant, the Samoans. You know, we're talking like the late 70s now.
Yeah.
We're talking about really before the big 84 boom, I call it, when Hogan came around. And of course, I was around for that time. And that was one of the reasons why I think I became a pro wrestler, was because of that love of going to the Coliseum.
Yeah.
And but at that particular time with the whole Godfather thing, what happened was I got a call from Tony Garea. And it all kind of came from somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody. And that they were just looking for an independent guy to kind of do this thing with the Godfather. And Tony Garea had called me, and you know, I just happened to agree to do it, and it was in the right place at the right time. And I remember, you know, being so overwhelmed with being backstage, you know, and here were the guys that I was watching on TV every night, the Austins, the Undertakers, trying to think of, man, I can't even remember who else was back around that time frame.
This is like 80.
This was 98.
Oh, 98. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I just remember them, going over everything with me, and here I was sitting out in the audience. And at that particular time, it was a couple of weeks prior to Christmas, and they had never done anything like that, where they basically pulled up an audience member and gave the quote unquote the host to somebody. But at that time, Godfather was teaming with Val Venus, and they were feuding with the Acolytes, which was Farouk and Bradshaw.
Yeah.
And
Right.
at that particular time. And I just, it was a couple of weeks before Christmas, and The Godfather came out, and he came out with these two redhead girls that were absolutely beautiful. And, anybody I'm going to give a lucky fan an early Christmas present, and I just happened to be that, in front of 14, I don't even remember what the Coliseum held back then, maybe 12,000 people.
Something like that, yeah.
Out of 12,000 people, I got picked. And it was a trip,
What are the odds of that happening?
Yeah, really, and it was funny because I remember standing in the ring, and I remember hearing people shout my name, and that overwhelming feeling, like it's a feeling that you can't describe, and then walking up the ramp, coming through the curtain and almost getting leveled by Bradshaw, because Bradshaw, they were doing a run-in, and as I don't think I've ever told this story. As we were walking up the ramp, what you don't realize that the old Titantron ramps were steel grates.
Right.
One of the girls that I was walking up with had these stiletto heels on. Got her heel caught in the grate, and it ripped her heel off. So we're on live television now. There's no rehearsing this.
No.
So as we're walking up, I have my arms wrapped around, and at that particular time, I was very heavy. I was well over 350, I think, at that time in my life when I was wrestling. And I know Jay and Tom remember how big I probably was. And the girl fell, and I grabbed her around the waist, and I'm like, what? And I was like whispering to her. As I can hear people yelling at me from the gorilla position, kid, hurry the freak up. I don't want to swear.
Right.
But, and I remember walking through the curtain, and Bradshaw literally palming me in my face and pushing me out of the way. Kid, move out of the way, bro.
We're in the middle of something there.
I remember going backstage, and I remember Chief J. Strongbow being backstage. He was one of the agents back then, Georgie Animal Steel. I forgot who else was probably back there. It's been a long time. But I remember going down the stairs, as we're going into the main garage of the Coliseum before it splits off. And if you remember back in the way the old Coliseum was designed, where the Zamboni used to come on the ice was where the whole Titantron was.
Yeah.
So when you would go down the stairs, you would come out to the garage, and then you would go to the right or left to hit the locker rooms, where the Nighthawk locker rooms were.
Yep.
I
spent many a night at the Nighthawks.
Right, and that's where all the individual dressing rooms were. As we came down the stairs, I remember saying to myself, man, I got to get these girls' phone number and hang out with them. All I remember was about 10 production assistants that were like college kids with earpieces and clipboards came and grabbed me, like physically grabbed me by the arm, said, come here with us, Bulldog. And they grabbed the girls and they went one way. And I just remember, like, I had to go into an office and sign all these release forms, And then I was just like, well, who are the girls, man? I wanted to get their phone number, And I just remember, like, after I had gotten done, at the time, one of the associate directors, and it wasn't Kevin Dunn, but one of them had came up to me and was just like, listen, you did a fantastic job, and we want to get your information for future stuff. And I said, okay, great, And I had friends that were sitting out in the audience at that time, and one of them was a kid by the name of Steve Cundy, who did a talk show.
Of course,
Yeah.
Stone Cold Steve Cundy.
I can't remember. I don't remember what show he did.
Ringside Seat. With Jay.
Ringside Seat, yeah. I was with Steve Cundy and
Yep.
another kid by the name of Dave Polino at the time.
Yep.
And Dave had done some stuff with Steve Cundy, and we were with Kelly Nash at the time from KC 101. Kelly Nash was a DJ on KC 101 at the time. Who Kelly was real good for getting us like. KC 101 used to do these meet and greet pizza parties prior to all the wrestling shows, where you could call up, you would win tickets to Raw, and then you'd get to go downstairs and have a pizza party, and then they would bring in like one or two wrestlers prior to the event. And I remember going to one, like Owen Hart came out, and we got our picture taken with Owen at that time, and I was training at that time, and I was very actively involved in independence. But I remember, like, as soon as we got done signing all these papers, they basically just said, you can hang out like backstage. you know. And I don't know if you guys remember, but if you remember the angle when the Undertaker was basically kind of like kidnapping Stephanie.
Yep.
Which-
That was
and
back
then-
in the
yeah.
and then
Ministry
you
of
remember-
Darkness, of course.
Right, and then they
Ministry of Darkness,
crucified, like Austin kind of got crucified on the cross,
Yeah.
and it caused a lot of controversy. That was that night.
Oh, okay.
So
wow.
I remember being backstage, and I was at that time there was a girl that kind of helped get me on the show, and in the wrestling business we kind of call them rats, but
Right.
it was basically like a groupie girl that I had known very well, and she was very instrumental in getting me on TV at that point. She just knew the right people, and I remember me and her were hanging out backstage, and I was sitting on like a great. It was like a big like box. It was a wire box, and I was looking straight ahead, and in straight ahead was kind of like what they commonly refer to as the pit. It's basically where all the wrestlers kind of hang out, and they're watching a monitor prior from them, and just before they get called to kind of walk through to go up to the gorilla position,
Yeah.
you know. And I remember just sitting back there looking at guys like Undertaker and all, you know, all the guys that were really big back then, you know, and just realizing like, holy crap, you know, like in my own way, I kind of made it,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
And
You're there.
that was just a phenomenal night. And then I was invited to a VIP party that night with all the guys that we ended up down at a gentleman's club. And those two girls, that I found out where they came from that night. They came from that gentleman's
They
club.
were the same
Yeah, they
gentleman,
came from
right.
Stage Door Johnny's. But,
Stage Door Johnny's,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that was,
I remember
I
that
believe
place.
that wasn't that Tom's favorite place back in the day?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think Tom spent a lot of dollar bills back in
Don't
those
be
days.
revealing my secrets.
Yeah, right. But and it was a trip, man, because like, you know, for a local kid like myself at that time to kind
without
of
a
do
doubt.
that was what we were all striving for.
Yeah.
Was to try and get that contract, and you know, this was prior to the Connecticut-based guys that were getting signed, like the you know, like Matt Morgan and. Johnny Heartbreaker, who went on to do the Heartthrobs with Antonio Thomas
Yeah.
and stuff. And, you know, it was before you had seen people like them or people like Velvet Sky out of
Sky,
Connecticut
yeah.
come out and get signed.
Yep.
You know, there really hadn't been a lot of Connecticut-based guys that got signed.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, you know, it was a huge deal for me at that point, you know, to kind of get that little bit of a WWE.
And how old were you at the
push.
time? Just
That was in '98, so.
when you were just like a.
Let's see, I'm 25 now, so just kidding. I was somewhere probably in my early 30s.
Oh, so
I would think,
So
you know.
you had been working a while on it. It wasn't.
Yeah,
Like a,
and I had
were a
kind of a
little
late
kid.
start in my independent career. You know, when most people were starting at 16, 17,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't really start until I was pretty much almost into my my mid 20s.
Okay.
And that was because of the problems that we had here in Connecticut. You know, we had no schools back then.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no place for us to train. You know, so a lot of us that were Connecticut-based guys that were looking to train. I know, like Rex Lethal, for instance. You know, he got trained in New Jersey. You know, and he lived here in Connecticut. Zombie, Slam Dog, and Mercenary. Basically, they kind of all came out of Killer Kowalski School.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so we
Right.
were driving up to Malden, Mass.
Yeah.
Or you know, the Musketeer. If you remember the Musketeer from ECW, he was. He got trained at Johnny Roz's school,
Johnny
and he was a
Roz in
Fairfield
yeah.
native, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
So I mean, you know, there was no wrestling schools here in Connecticut.
But the guys that came out of Johnny Roth school, oh my God.
Well, you know,
could
you
sit
had
all
guys
night.
like Dreamer, Taz,
Oh, yeah. What
the
a-
Dudleys, you know, that came out of there. So
Yeah.
I mean, then you had Kowalski School, and you forget who came out of there. You know, you had guys like Perry
China
Saturn,
also.
China.
Everybody knows Triple H.
Triple H came
Yeah.
out of there.
Oh, yeah.
Albert came out of there, and you know, Prince Albert. I forgot
Yeah.
what name he's going by now.
Tensai.
Tensai. You know,
Tensai.
I mean, he came out of there. You know, April Hunter.
Yeah,
You know,
it's just amazing,
There was,
yeah,
you know, there was
how
a long,
close we are.
long list. You know, and it was right around that time too, right around the late '90s, early 2000s, when you started seeing kind of the first school. And Jason Knight, who I was a very good personal friend of mine, kind of opened up the first school,
Yeah.
and that was the House of Pain Dojo. He opened up in Waterbury, and that's where you know Velvet Sky came out of, Mercedes Martinez, Joseph Von Schmidt, Bull Dread,
Bull Dread, yeah. Yep.
you know, and guys like myself, Zombie, Dylan Cage, who was very famous on the Independents,
Yeah.
came out of there, and.
Is that school still in existence? Or?
No. Unfortunately, Jason folded that school. Probably, I remember I got married in 2003. ACW, we ran Assault Championship Wrestling in the early 2000s. So I want to say probably around 2004 maybe. And it was right after that when me and Mikey Milano had branched away from ACW, and we started Defiant Pro Wrestling.
Right.
And then Mike started opening up his own school at that point, and tried to open up his own school. So.
That's the Defiant Incorporated. I think they're out of Chicopee.
No. We were out of Waterbury at that time. The original school that Mike had opened up was in Waterbury. It was actually about 5 doors down from the old ACW school. And then he moved the school over to Wilkett, and that's when Slick took over as head trainer for a while there.
Right.
And it was nice because we had a place to train, And at that same time, when Jason had ran his school in the early 2000s, that's when Fred Yale had opened up his school in Milford. And that's when you had guys like John Brooks came out of there, Jay Busta, Spider, Nocturne.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The Untouchables, Anthony Michaels and Gore came out of there. There were a lot of other guys. The names aren't coming to me. I'm thinking of the guys who are still actively
The
working.
who's who of the Connecticut scene.
Right,
here.
right. Exactly.
And then eventually over the time you had guys like Paul Rome opened up his school, and Brian Anthony kind of, Brian Anthony had gotten his start at Jason Knight's school.
Yep.
A lot of people didn't realize that he got his start at Jason Knight's school. He later went on and trained with Paul Roma, and Roma kind of helped that kind of resurgence. Guys like Dave Cole and stuff like that. Well, okay, Dave Cole came out of Fred Yale School, which was the New Era School, which we later went on and we opened up Connecticut Championship Wrestling at one point. So
a lot of that stuff's still on YouTube, believe it or not.
yeah,
It's popping up all over.
it's amazing because I every once in a while I get people that send me stuff, and they'll send me some stuff that I had done, and my career kind of was interesting because of the simple fact that after that Raw thing had happened, my independent career kind of started to boom, and I was getting a lot of bookings. My problem was, and I'll be brutally honest with you guys, is that I just was never in the shape that I thought I should be in to be a wrestler. And the reason why I tell this story now, if you would have asked me this question years ago, and I'm sure Jay and Tom could probably allude to this, and I don't mean to bring things down a level and bring things to a serious level,
No.
but I really thought who I was back then. And a lot of us on the independent level really did, because we were all striving for that one thing. And back in those days, in the 90s, the chances of some of us getting signed were good, because there was a lot of places we can go and work. You had not only WWF, we had WCW at the time.
Yep.
ECW was booming, man.
Yep.
And then and I talked about this backstage a little bit. Then there was always the opportunity to go in Japan. And it was very hard to go to Japan back in those days. And Japan was where you wanted to go.
Yeah, it's still a hot spot.
It is, but
You can make it there.
the problem is now is that you can buy your way to Japan. I see people that go to Japan that have no business being in Japan. And so, it was a lot of the guys that were coming up, and I'm only speaking as the Connecticut-based guys. We had that opportunity. The problem was we just didn't have the outlets, and there was so much traveling that we had to do back in those days, man. So much traveling, and the independents were suffering. I mean, the only, at that particular time, that I can really tell you that was probably the most legit Fed that was was running was the late Tony Rumble, the Boston Bad Boy, had ran I forgot, the Century Wrestling Alliance. I think that's what he called it. But that was where like Dreamer started, Taz started as Tasmaniac. And if you go back and watch any of the early stuff that Dreamer and Taz talk about, like in their shoot tapes or any of their bios, they talk a lot about how Tony Rumble gave them his start. Tony Rumble was giving a lot of people their start. He gave Ron Zombie his start. He gave Slam Dog Mercenary, even myself a little bit. Slick Wagner Brown, Jason Rumble. There were a lot of guys that are still active. Bo Douglas, a lot of guys now that are working for Sheldon Goldberg up in Mass that were coming through there. And that was the closest thing to working for Vince at that point, because he ran such a tight ship, and he had he still had a lot of ties with Vince, but it was so hard for us. So the only thing we could do as independent guys was just bust our butt, which was beg and plead to get on any independent show we could and just drive, man. I remember just driving to shows.
And it would cost you more to get there than you would
Well,
make it.
but
really.
we thought, and this is the problem with independent wrestlers. They think they're big time. They think that because they get a suitcase and they get a gimmick bag and they get gear and they get 8x10s that they're workers. And the reality of it is they are workers to a certain extent, but you really haven't made it until you're at the big time. And that's the biggest problem. And there was a lot of us, we weren't content on just doing independence. I think that a lot of the problems now with a lot of independent guys and independents is that they're very content with just saying, I'm an independent wrestler, I'm a pro wrestler, and I have a Facebook page, and I have 8x10s, and I have merchandise, because back in those days, we had to bust our ass, excuse my language if I can say that,
No, you're right.
but to really get our names out there, we didn't have agents.
Right.
Right.
And
And you didn't have social media. You didn't have the
and that was
exactly.
exactly. My early
The internet was just
my
very
first
young.
my
Right.
first take with the internet was web TV. And I remember my very first website was started by Spider. I had met Spider at a show when he was 16 years old. I was working for Dan Severn, the former UFC champion.
Right.
Of course.
Myself, Tiger Mulligan, and Johnny Heartbreaker, and who went on, and I can't remember what his name was in the WWF.
Too many chair shots.
Yeah, way too many.
Too many.
You can blame Ron Zombie for that.
There you
Right.
go.
But we really struggled in coming up, and then I remember meeting Spider, and Spider knew a lot about websites, and I remember he designed a lot of websites for us in the beginning, and he designed mine. But that was basically the only way we had to kind of publicize ourselves, was as the resurgence of the internet kind of came in, was really starting to market ourselves. And then, we'd all find that one company that could mass produce 8x10s.
Yeah.
We tried to find the cheapest company we could. I remember going to this little photography shop in Brantford at the time. It was a 1-hour photo shop that was in the Brandhaven Plaza.
Yep.
They had a studio in the back. I remember going in there and paying $50 for the girl to take pictures
I
of
used
me.
to run the record town right there.
Okay, yeah. So it was
Way
like
back in the day.
I think it was like a moto photo. I can't exactly remember the name of the.
Yep.
But I remember going in there. They had a little studio in the back. Going in there with my gear on. She took probably about 100 shots, going through the proofs, and then at the time there was this one company down in Orlando called Great Graphics Photo Scan that's still there, that we were all going down there and getting 8x10s done. And we thought because we had 8x10s that we made it. It was like, man, we made it. We had 8x10s. And that's where a lot of the problem lies now. It's very easy for people to kind of come in, go to a wrestling school, and then say, well, I'm a pro wrestler, And I firmly believe that if you're not striving for that one goal, which is to get yourself noticed, it's almost pointless, man. It's the chances of you going out and getting hit by lightning are better, than getting a contract. Right. It's so hard to get a contract. I don't think the common wrestling fan or the common people know that. It's very, very hard to get a contract.
We don't have the territories anymore. I wrote about this recently, that the territories are gone. You don't have OVW, you don't have Florida Championship, you don't have Georgia Championship. Right. Back when you're talking, a lot of those were still in existence, and you can go from state to state, or tri-state to tri-state, and Dusty Rhodes had his place, and
and that was the thing, I mean, the territories were slowly kind of not really much around when I kind of got into the business.
Yeah, they were dying out then too.
They were, Vince had pretty much bought them up at that point, or they were dying out at that point.
But that was an option back in the day. But as slowly, like you said, as Vince bought up everything, now the only two national companies we really have are WWF or WWE. And TNA. And TNA is almost non-existent. Ring of Honor is kind of on the fringe.
And here's the thing, but even as an independent wrestler, you should still be striving to get to TNA. Right. Because it's television exposure. Yep. It's national television exposure. And I get very upset when I talk to wrestling fans and they tell me, well, TNA's crap. And granted, listen, that's a personal opinion, but as an independent wrestler, if I'm sitting there and I'm down at the PWA school and I got guys like Bull Dredd and Joseph Von Schmidt training me, and I'm doing shows every weekend, I want to be looked at. I remember me and Lethal and Zombie and a guy named Big Daddy who was a manager. I'm sure you guys remember Big Daddy.
Big Daddy.
I remember sitting at Big Daddy's house in East Haven because he had he had money. He had money at that time, and he had bought like 5 or 6 VCRs, and we were making demo tapes at his house.
Yeah.
And we would sit there, me and him, and he had web TV also because we couldn't afford computers back then.
Yeah.
And we would look up everybody's name, Jim Cornette's, Dusty's name, anybody that ran a company,
Yeah.
Dory Funk. And I remember we would just send tapes out. And every day I seemed like I was going to Brantford Post Office, and I would show up with like 14 or 20 VHS tapes and mail them out, you know, because you just wanted to get looked at.
Yeah.
The guy
And
at the
you
post office is looking
right.
at you like,
You
what
know,
are you doing?
and keep in mind, we didn't have cell phones back then. We had pagers, and you had landline phones.
Yeah.
You know, and you would just pray to God that maybe somebody did. And if you were lucky enough and you had that email, if you had an email account, you know, if you had Prodigy or you had the early stages of AOL, maybe you would get an email. I still have emails from Dusty and Jim Cornette that I saved.
Awesome.
You know, basically telling me, hey, thanks, but no thanks. You know?
Yeah,
So-
but
We
still.
have to take a call here. If I can remember which button it was.
Bottom right.
Bottom right.
There you go.
New system here.
You're on the air.
You are live on the air.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Nothing. We got
Nothing.
nothing here, fellas.
Nothing.
Crack staff.
Crack staff.
It's the one on the left.
Oh, it's going through.
Oh. Nothing.
Nothing.
We got nothing here, fellas.
Well, let us know if you can get the call through.
But at any rate.
He says it's giving him flack.
Oh. I don't know.
We're, I don't know if we can use those words on the air, though.
The wonders of technology, huh?
Seriously.
At any rate.
But as I was saying, you know, I mean, for us, a lot of us in Connecticut that were trying to make it big, we were lucky. You know, I mean, one of the things that I got particularly lucky with was I was given the opportunity to work for ECW. And it came about through a Connecticut promoter by the name of Michael Breen, who was promoting with Tony Rumble at that time to bring ECW in. And my background's been in personal security. I got trained at an early age to do security work. And I'm not talking rent-a-cop work. I was trained to do basically like Hollywood-type security, concert security, and I'd worked for a lot of national-based companies. So as I was training in my early days to become a pro wrestler, I was doing a lot of security work. And I worked for the Coliseum. I worked for Jimmy Koplik at one point. I remember Michael Breen contacting me saying, hey, do you want to do security for ECW? And we were like, yeah, you know. And he said, well, here's the thing. He goes, you're going to run the entire security team for ECW every time they come to Connecticut.
Wow.
And he goes, you're going to deal directly with Paul. And I was like, what? And I'm like, you know, and I always knew who Paul Heyman was because I was
Right.
such a fan of his work.
Yeah.
In you know, in his early
Paulie
work.
Dangerously character.
Yeah, like the
WCW. I
Dangerous
like that,
Alliance and
yeah.
stuff he did early on, you know. And you know, and that was the thing too with a lot of us. A lot of us that when we were coming up, we were masters we honed our craft by watching tapes constantly. You know, that I remember just like me and Zombie like watching tapes, and you know, you were constantly trying to learn stuff. You know, and I'm a huge proponent, and anyone that's training to become an independent wrestler, you need to watch tapes. You need to find as much stuff as you can and watch it. And I'm not talking about stuff from Japan or anything. Watch just old AWA stuff.
Goodness me.
Watch old world-class stuff
Know
with
your
the Von
history.
Erichs.
You know what?
Know your history.
$10 a month, get the network, and
Right,
you're good to go.
You know, I mean,
Exactly.
Everything's
and
on
it's
there.
easier now.
That's highly
It's
recommended,
more
I'd
easier
say.
now to watch stuff than it was for back then.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to have to send away for videotapes.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I
we
mean,
should-
I still have an awesome video collection,
Yeah.
a videotape collection. I'm talking about VHS tapes.
VHS,
you know? And I was very fortunate enough that I had that. You know.
Yeah, we used to trade them and just go nuts with
Well,
them.
that was the thing.
back
Tape
and
trading
forth.
was huge back then. You know.
That was the only way.
So.
And you know, because we only had, you know, around here, you were lucky to get when we were younger, the WWF and maybe, you know, once in a while you got like Mid-South, and you got, you know.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the resurgence of the internet. The
Yeah.
internet helped people get involved in tape trading. You know,
and then cable, you know, once in a while they'd show, you know, the different territories.
I mean, those
then
were the
the
things
only
that-
way to get them was, you know, find somebody down south.
That's
Hey,
it.
tape this. I'll
and
trade
those
you.
were the things that we had to do, and that's why a lot of us, you know, when we were traveling in those late '90s, in the mid '90s to late '90s, you know, we'd bring a video camera, and we'd bring these big,
these massive units.
I'm looking at these big cameras,
Yep.
where you know, it would pop out, you put a whole tape in there,
Yep.
and then you try and find someone to videotape, or if you were lucky enough that the company you worked for that had that,
Yep.
and that you would try and get them to send you a copy of your match, you know. So I mean, and it was very hard. But then and going back to what I was talking, I lost my train of thought. But I was lucky enough to work security for ECW,
Yeah, right.
and that's really what helped me get a better hold on my craft was doing security for ECW.
What was it like working for Paul?
Well, here's the thing. Look, I never really dealt with him though. Like
They said you were going to deal with him.
Right, Michael Breen was like, "Yeah, you're going to deal with Paul," and then I think I can remember meeting Paul maybe once or twice. Yeah. The problem was I dealt more with guys like Tony Rumble and stuff. Basically, the promoters, the Connecticut-based promoters that brought ECW in, I kind of dealt more with them, But where it helped me out was just talking to guys like Taz and Bubba and Devon, Just Incredible, Shane Douglas, and it was kind of nice to watch the ECW just blossom because I was such a huge fan of it. I think anybody that was around back then remembers, coming home on a Friday or Saturday night at 2 o'clock in the morning and turning on the MSG network, and saying, "What the hell is this stuff?"
There it was in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
like everybody else is sleeping and you're up watching that.
Yeah, and it was just like, and then just being blown away at the storylines that were coming out of there. I've been fortunate enough to be really good friends with the Blue Meanie over years, and I still talk to Blue every once in a while. And when I do see him, we'll reminisce once in a while, and he'll, it's kind of cool just to listen to stories.
Yeah, oh yeah.
A couple years ago, I was lucky enough to be I was at a horror themed convention down in New Jersey with him and Al Snow, and they were up in my suite, I was just listening to him and Al Snow kind of talking. I was like a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, wow, just like hearing about the early days of ECW.
Al Snow and Head.
Like. Yeah, just.
What does everybody want?
Just hearing about, how it was. But, the good thing about it was a lot of those guys were really good with the independent guys back then. They really wanted to see guys make it, but it was just so hard.
Well, Dreamer's still like that to this day.
Yeah, I mean, Dreamer's real easygoing, and that was the thing. And I remember
his Dreamer main evented on TNA Thursday night.
Right, but he still got his thing going in New York, and
but it was just hard to make it. You just had to be in the right place. I remember, being at the Connecticut Armory when Ron Zombie had his tryout, and. I mean, nobody wanted to see somebody get signed more than I did. I wanted to see Zombie do something because ECW was just so fitting for him.
Yeah.
And just remember, like, right around then was the surgence of ECW, and it was just like they're not signing anybody because that was shortly right before they had their first big pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Back then too. And it was hard, man. It's still really difficult.
Yeah.
And I really feel for a lot of the independent guys right now.
Oh yeah.
And it is hard, because a lot of them stay very loyal to their own base, their home companies, and for me personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with working for your home company, but you need to branch out. You need to let people know who you are.
Yeah.
You can't just work for one Fed. You can't, and unfortunately, there are still promoters out there. And these wannabe Vince guys that sit there and say, you can't, if you work for me, you can't work for any other promotion.
Right.
Keep in mind now, they're telling that to you as an independent wrestler, and they don't pay you.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and
that's how you make the money is by going around to different companies.
Well, the problem is you're never going to make
it's
money on
the
an independent level. It's exposure.
It's exposure.
Yeah, I think I don't mean like you're going to make a lot of money.
Right. If you make $20, sometimes you're lucky.
If you make enough to cover the trim.
I
mean, big enough to put back in the gas tank.
There are countless stories that I can tell you about promoters paying us in food, in women, in drugs, in alcohol.
Wow.
I mean, Livewire Dave Padula, who's a wrestler out of Rhode Island, tells one of the funniest stories in his stories where he got paid in stale Entenmann's cookies.
Oh, nice.
Because the promoter was an Entenmann's delivery driver.
Nice.
But I can also tell you stories of being at shows where. And one in particular comes to mind, which was we had worked for a guy who was in Connecticut for a while called J.C. Biggs. He ran a show in Stratford, Connecticut, and the main event was Rex Lethal versus Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Wow.
And on that show was Missy Hyatt, Tony DeVito, Primo Carnera. So, and then there were a lot of up-and-coming independent guys like myself, Zombie, Xavier, who was one of the first Ring of Honor champions. And in the middle of the show, Larry the Postman.
Of
Sorry,
course.
guys, that's the name from the blast. In the middle of intermission, the promoter takes off with the cash and walks out of the building.
Oh, wow.
there was and I still have the videotape to this day of the riot that ensued. Once word had gotten out backstage that the promoter had skipped out, Tony DeVito, who owned the ring at that time, kind of led this kind of coup. And it wasn't a gimmick, it was real life. We charged the ring and we shut down the show. You know, and the cops got called, and I remember the cops come, flying in there because it was a near riot because fans wanted their money back, and we weren't getting paid, And I've been on numerous shows where promoters have skipped out, and the sad reality of it is, I was just recently read a story a couple of weeks ago that a promoter had did this to Balls Mahoney and Jerry Lynn and I think some other workers, where a promoter had just basically booked this show and then just took off with the money box, and he was nowhere to be found. And it's sad that there are still people out there that are promoting shows like this, and it's hard because, again, you talk about being an independent worker,
so you don't even know if you're getting scammed by somebody.
And here's
they're telling you to come down.
Right, and here's the catch-22 in all this. As much as I may preach that being an independent worker, you don't want to always just wrestle for your home fed. Sometimes it's almost like you're safer to wrestle for them because you know you're not going to get,
dealing with.
you know who you're dealing with, and you're not going to get, I don't know if I can say this, but you're not going to get screwed over.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing. And the problem is too is, any Connecticut reason, there's just not a lot of independent companies anymore. Right. There's only 2 independent companies that run on a regular basis here in Connecticut right now. You have Joseph Von Schmidt's PWA, and then you got Michael Bryant's Northeast Wrestling that runs out of Bethany. Yep. And what Joseph Von Schmidt is doing down there, is he pretty much has his students that he's elevating, and he does bring in outside talent, and I love his stuff. And being someone that watched him, remembers the first day him and Bull Dread walked into JC Knight School, and seeing what he's done with his career, I couldn't be happier for him right now. But here's a prime example that there's a kid that should be getting signed.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like why?
Full disclosure, right? I mean, my son is a student at PWA,
right.
And we're huge, huge fans and marks for Joseph Von Schmidt and his guys.
And he's doing
we've had a lot of them on, so
and he's doing really good work down there. And that's the thing. And when you watch somebody that you helped. Listen, I'm not saying I helped train him, but I was there and I worked out with him in the ring. When I was at Jason Knight School, I was kind of like an assistant coach for Jason, but I remember helping him run drills and stuff, and watching his earlier character as Pat Gunner, him and Apollo kind of started with this, and then Bull Dread kind of started with this dreaded guns thing, and and then and when he ran the early stages of PWA. The early stage of it, the first leg of it, and then he kind of came back and re-elevated himself. That's really good. And then, of course, you got what Michael Bryan does, which is just phenomenal stuff. I mean, this guy's running, you don't see a lot of independent shows that are drawing over 1,000 people, right. And when he's going into high schools, he's doing that, but he can afford to bring in the names. So he's bringing in Jerry Lawler, Matt Hardy. He's still bringing in people that draw.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the hardest thing with a lot of us that were coming in.
He did a show, 2 years ago at Fishkill, New York, and he brought in Hogan.
Right.
And it was at the baseball stadium, and he packed the joint.
That was Hogan Piper, I think, right?
Yeah. Hogan, Piper, Vader.
Yep.
How many states does he run in now? New York? All of the Northeast, right?
Yeah, I think he's pretty much just sticking in New York and Connecticut right now.
But that was just. I mean, granted, Hogan was the draw, but it was a sold.
And he's a great guy to
stadium.
work for. I had the privilege of working for Michael Bryan, helped run his locker room for him. Back around 2004.
Yeah, I know Dredd still does some work with him.
Yeah, so
and
I mean,
a lot of the
But and unfortunately,
Jay Busta and those
like
guys.
I said, it's just hard. It's hard to be an independent wrestler right now. You know, and the problem is just finding a reputable school. Everybody has a wrestling school now, and that's the hardest thing. And there's not a lot of what I call really good quality schools. I think here in Connecticut, obviously, the best training you're going to get is by going to PWA. But the problem is that you don't see a lot of WWE guys that are opening schools anymore. Yeah. And it is hard. I mean, so on one
Santino
hand,
Marella just opened his in Canada. So
right. So I mean, you got guys
there.
like him, and you got guys like Lance Storm. I remember Taz had his dojo open up for a while, and Johnny Ross is still around. But I mean, and those are the schools that you kind of want to go to because you want to learn from somebody that has experience, that has been to the big show, that knows what it's like to wrestle in the big time, And that's really key is that you need to get that and you need to learn from them. And you have to hope and pray that you're not being taken too.
Right.
Of course, now you got the biggest wrestling school of them all, the WWE Performance Center.
Right, but unfortunately you can't buy your way in there.
Right. You can't just walk in the door and say, I want to be a wrestler.
And that was a difference when they
That's what Triple H basically says you can do, though. But
well, I mean, there's training classes down there where you can get into. I remember in OVW, when OVW was around, that you used to be able to just drive down there.
Yeah.
You can go to just I remember like there was a group of us that really contemplating at one point saying, okay, well, let's we're going to go to OVW. We're just going to kind of go there and we're going to find a place to live. And that's what so many wrestlers did. And believe it or not, a lot of people that went to the WWE, that's how they got their start. I have a very good one of the divas who went by the name of Cherry. Her name was Kara Slice in the Independence. Cherry was the manager for Deuce and Domino.
Yeah.
When they were around.
You got the action figure.
And Cherry was actually at my wedding, I remember. She was a very good friend of mine, but she got her start. The way she got her contract was that she left her hometown in New Jersey with a couple of independent guys and said, we're just going to try and walk her way into OVW. And that's exactly what she did.
Yeah.
She walked her way right onto OVW. And at that time, she got noticed and they teamed her up with Deuce and they teamed her up with Domino. And next thing you know, you're getting called up, and
next thing they're on SmackDown.
And that was the thing that you used to be able to do, And the OVW is still around for TNA and you can still do that. The problem is that you're not seeing TNA call up a lot of young guys anymore.
Right.
They're not doing it. They want to do this resurgence of these old guys.
Yeah, it's really
not old guys, but the people with time.
Right.
So.
We're gonna try this again.
Maybe.
But I mean, we're seeing now with NXT. On the WWE network, they're bringing in some of the guys that have come from the Performance Center,
right?
And they're elevating them to the main roster.
And I think that's awesome. I think what they're doing now, and I'm not in the WWE loop as much as I probably should be. I do watch it from time to time. Actually, this past Sunday was the first time I've watched a pay-per-view in probably a year. A friend of mine had invited me over, and I said, you know what, let me just, I'm curious to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I do have people that I know that are under contract up there. Kofi Kingston, I was friends with him for a little bit when he was on the Independents. And you're always looking to see who's coming up. So I like what they're doing. I like to, that they're bringing in people like Adam Rose and stuff like that.
It's party time.
Yeah.
Well, the Wyatt family is great.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, one of the Wyatts was a guy named, and I forgot, his name's going to slip me for a while. I forgot what name the
Bray Wyatt is
not Bray. The guy.
Eric Rowan, Luke Harper.
Yeah, Luke Harper was Brody Lee on the Independents.
Yeah.
And Brody Lee
basically doing the same gimmick though.
Yeah, and basically he is. I mean, Brody had. I remember doing a couple of shows. I was on a couple of shows with him, because he was a New York-based guy.
Yep.
So that's good when you see stuff like that happen. I got a friend of mine right now, Smith James, who's down in the Performance Center right now, is going by the name of Bull Dempsey, and he just finally got called up to the what you consider the main roster for next.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize is that when you go down when you get an independent contract or when you get a developmental deal contract, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be on TV.
Right.
You're training.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And just like you want to do when you go to the W, you want to get called up to the main roster for next. And Bull Dempsey.
It's like the minor leagues. You want to get called up to.
And his time was coming, and I remember he had posted something about it, and I was just astonished. Not astonished, but just astonished at one hand, but also just overwhelmed with joy to watch somebody that well get called up. And every day, man, I keep my fingers crossed that he gets called up to the main roster for Vince.
Keep working and working, and it'll be on Raw and SmackDown.
And we were saying that we've seen the Cenas and the Ortons, and we've seen every possible combination of those like dozen guys that have been there for 10, 15, going on 20 years now. Bubba Ray's been around forever on TNA. And we've seen every possible combination, and it's stale. And it's
Reigns even said it last night. Nobody wants to see John Cena versus Randy Orton.
Right, and it's no knock on these guys, but we've seen it.
We're tired. We want
we've seen
something
it,
new.
and we want something different.
Well, and that's where
these younger guys,
and that's where the surgence of the younger guys come in.
Right.
Unfortunately, until the riders can do something, you're going to get that John Cena thing. I watched that pay-per-view on Sunday. And I have opinions about wrestling, but I just don't choose to voice my opinions.
Yeah.
And it was just so obvious as I was watching that like the obvious thing would have been to make Roman Reigns win.
Yeah.
But you knew it wasn't going to happen. John Cena's money, and whether or not you like him or not as a character, I mean, here was a guy I remember watching on the Independents. I mean. It's another one of those things that, you're happy for the guy, and people can say what they want. Wrestling is what it is, but if you're making money and when you break it down into buy rates and pay stuff, if John Cena's match is the highest watched match, you really think Vince is going to take him off television?
No, I mean, he's the number one selling merch guy, right, in the company, the number one selling merch guy. So, I mean, they can, chant Cena sucks.
With Reigns, they're talking about a slow burn. They're talking about, I'm here in WrestleMania
30,
31.
Here's the
31
thing.
wins.
They can talk about everything. I mean, listen, over the years, how many rumors have we all heard about who was going to get a belt?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, the kid's money right now, Romeo, he's definitely money. He's got a good look. I enjoy the stuff that he's doing. I am a huge Dean Ambrose fan right now.
Yep.
I love the stuff he was doing.
Too.
I was a huge John Moxley fan back when he was on the Independents, when he was working for Combat Zone. I knew who he was. I was well aware of what he was doing on the independent level. And if you ever watch his early independent promos on YouTube, I mean, listen, independent guys don't do those kind of promos. They just don't. They don't know how to do them. And Moxley, or Ambrose, as they call him now, he was doing promos that were Vince-level promos as an independent level with nobody writing his promos.
Yeah.
That's how you know someone's going to make it. When you watch an independent guy wrestle, you can tell. Like, maybe because I've been around for a while, I don't go to independent shows anymore. Although recently, and this is probably a good time to kind of start to set the wheels in motion. I'm seriously considering coming out of retirement for a little while and starting to wrestle again.
I'm glad to have you here because nobody's heard from you at all. In many years.
And here's the truth. And here's the truth. And again, I don't want to take things down a sour path.
No,
I just had for myself, and I'm gonna. I don't know how much I'm talking as Bulldog right now as I'm talking as Bob, who I really am. Everybody's well aware of that in Connecticut in 2005 we lost Spider. Spider was my best friend, and he got killed tragically in a wrestling ring. I never recovered from that, and I never will. When you lose, everybody out there who's watching this show right now, and even as I sit here with you three, we all know what it's like to lose someone we love. When you lose your best friend, and the thing was, Spider was 22 when he got killed, and he was just. I have a younger brother. My brother's 31 now. Danny would have been 31 last Saturday. He actually, it's kind of a weird thing. He shares the same birthday as Mikey Milano. So as Mike was, I think, approaching his 49th or 50th birthday, Danny Spider would have been, I think, 31 at that, 31, 32. And for me personally, what left me a real bad, sour note, taste in my mouth about wrestling was when we had lost Danny. At that time, I was booking for CCW. And what a lot of people never knew, and I never told this story before, prior to Danny's death, we were Connecticut Championship Wrestling, which was run by myself, Joe LaChance, and Mike Paolini, was getting ready to do one of the biggest shows they'd ever done in the history of their career. We had just signed Matt Hardy. Matt Hardy hadn't done one independent appearance then. This was around the time that whole Edge Alita thing was going on, and a lot of people didn't know if it was a work or if it was a shoot. But Matt had gotten released, and we were able to get him signed.
This was a card in Northford?
This was a show that was in Northford. Mike Banks, who runs Wrestle Jam now, had a lot to do with that show. And kudos to Mike for helping out with that show. And then I remember getting the call that Danny had gotten killed. I was performing I work as an actor also. I was doing a dinner show at the Chowder Pot in Hartford, and I remember getting that phone call at about 10:30 at night that he had died. And we in Connecticut had never experienced anything like that. Not only in Connecticut, but we had just never experienced anything like that on the independent level. Right. There had never been a wrestler that got killed in the ring. Now, we're talking about getting killed in a ring, okay? We're not talking about the wrestlers who have had massive heart attacks in the ring, okay? We're talking about he died as a result of a move by a wrestler who had no business being in the ring to begin with, you know? And people have defended the wrestler, and I won't say his name because I don't think he's worthy of me even mentioning his name, have defended him. And I refuse to defend this kid. This kid had admitted in interviews that he had smoked weed prior to the match. The district attorney had, although he was cleared by the district attorney in the state of Mass, he was looking at charges at that point, and Danny's family was pushing to get answers. So Danny gets killed, and we're a week away from doing this show. Right. And the amount of pressure that myself, and I remember, and Nocturne's not here, so I can't speak for him. And unfortunately, I don't talk to Nocturne. I had a falling out with Nocturne a while ago because of my own stupidity. But I remember the weight of the world I felt was on my shoulder at that point. Because one, Spider's family had came to me and had asked me to be the spokesperson for his family. If you remember, if anybody was around back then remembers that the press was just blowing the story out. It was all over the place. It got picked up by the Associated Press and the World Press, which this was not a local story. When you get picked up by the Associated Press, which means that this is going to go out to California and all over the world. Right. We were getting phone calls from every major news organization, including 2020, you know, and I was getting asked to do interviews, you know, that I didn't want to do. You know, how do you go on television and talk about your best friend who just got killed in wrestling? How do you continue to sit in a business that you know just took your best friend's life? And now I got to run a show. You know, and I remember fighting with Mike Paolini and Joe LaChance, do we run this show? You know, we ran the show, and it turned out to be a memorial. I was lucky enough that because of who I was, and I know I'm going to sound like a little bit of an egomaniac, and I don't mean to be, but because of who I was able to make a lot of phone calls to a lot of independent wrestlers and beg them to come on. And the two biggest names that I got to come on that show that were never booked for that Danny show was Homicide and Low Key. Wow. Homicide has been a good friend of mine, and so has Low Key for years. And I remember reaching out to them saying, hey, I need your help, you know.
Homicide showed up in TNA shortly
thereafter. And another one that I got at that time was Rob Echoes. And Rob's down in TNA right now doing that Jersey Shore character. I forgot what name he's going by. Robbie E. Yeah, you know, and Rob was one of my go-to guys. I used to use Rob all the time when I was booking shows. And I remember sitting in Northford and just watching as literally 100 independent guys came walking through the door saying, we want to be on this show. We don't want to get paid. I don't care who we are. You know,
that's family, right?
Right. You know, and the hardest thing we had to do at that point, and I know I'm watching the clock here, I know we're running out of time, was telling Matt Hardy, here's Matt Hardy coming in doing an independent. He had no idea he was walking into a benefit show. Right. And I remember sitting with him. We were in a dressing room. It was just myself and him. And I had to explain to him what just happened. And here was a guy that didn't even know him that was welting up when I was telling him the story. And I remember asking him, listen, I got guys in the locker room that are in tears right now. I don't know how to handle this. And he said, don't worry, come with me. And Matt Hardy, who never had to do this, and this isn't some kind of written thing, this isn't a storyline. He took it upon himself to go in the locker room and gave a locker room speech that was just out of this world, and helped motivate everybody in that locker room to live on and carry this on. And then, you know, years later, 5 years later, I lose Mikey Milano in 2010. Mike dies of heart-related issues. And once again, my personal life is up. I was in a relationship with a beautiful girl for a long time, my fiance. A lot of people know her. She still works in wrestling today. She's a videotape girl. And unfortunately, I just fell to pieces. You know, I couldn't handle my life anymore. And I got very involved with the party lifestyle. And I had that monkey on my back for 4 years. and I distanced myself from wrestling. I alienated myself from all my friends. I walked away from an 8-year relationship with a girl that I wanted to marry and have children with. That, you know, and I pushed away my best friend, Nocturne, you know. And even Ron Zombie, who was my best man at my wedding at one point, you know, my relationship with him went sour, and I was only recently over the last couple of years to make amends to him and kind of straighten it out, because I just fell to pieces. You know, I became a raging party animal. You know, and I won't go into what I did, but you know, that lifestyle almost got me killed. And about 10 months ago, about 10 months ago, I finally just said enough's enough. And it came from almost dying myself and sitting in the hospital room for a week, you know, strapped to a gurney for 3 days. And you know, I live a different lifestyle now in my life. I'm on, you know, I hate to use the word straight edge, but you know, I'm basically straight edge. I'm very against partying and stuff. And the bitterness that I have towards wrestling is kind of, it's still always going to be there, but the reason why I'm thinking about coming back to the ring is just because, you know, I'm 46 now. I don't have a lot to give. I'm not going to get signed tomorrow.
Right.
But it's just wanting to perform. And if I can help elevate some young kid, I have no problem doing it now. You know, I don't need to get paid. You know, I'm not in here to make money.
That's where Dredd is at right now. He's working with the guys down at PWA. And he's, you know, like, he put on a hell of a match with Wrecking Ball Legursky, who's relatively new on the scene. And he really elevated this kid's career. And it was an incredible match.
I found out who that phone call was.
Yes.
It was our friend Bill from North Haven. Couldn't get through tonight. I am told he had a question about where everybody thinks the business is going to be like in 10 years.
That's... You know, here's the funny thing. I remember answering this question 20 years ago with you guys. Okay? I don't think it's going to change much. I don't see any kind of resurgence coming. We're never going to see wrestling be the way it was in the 80s. It's never going to happen. And here's the thing. Everything that has been done in the sport of pro wrestling has been done. What more can possibly be done? What new ways can we reinvent this business? You know,
something has to happen.
I mean, can it be done? Without a doubt, yeah, it can be. But it's going to take another guy like another Vince to come up, another Paul Heyman to come up and really do something. You know?
I honestly think get rid of the writers, because they got writers that were on soap operas. They got writers that, you know, write movies, and it's a different animal. You don't have Dusty.
Let the wrestlers write that.
You don't have a brain like Dusty Rhodes.
And here's the thing. I don't disagree with you guys. Two of my best friends were writers for Vince at one time. John Carlisle, who wrestled here in the Connecticut independent scene as Jay Fitch, and then Big Dick Johnson, Krista Joseph, who I remember teaching this kid how to book at CCW. And then, you know, he got on and became one of the most famous writers for Vince, and then became Big Dick Johnson.
But that's wrestling minds.
But they had wrestling minds.
Hollywood minds.
But here's the thing:
and soap opera minds.
If you know the story, if you know how they work back there, you'll understand why they will never use wrestling marks as writers. It's just not going to happen, man.
But
it's just not.
You know, the days of Dusty Rhodes writing the show, Tommy Dreamer writing the shows. Tommy Dreamer used to write, you know, all the ECW stuff.
And here's the thing, you know,
Joseph von Schmidt can write a show.
Right, and he does good stuff, and that was one of the reasons. Like I'm trying to get in with those to talk to Joe and Dredd again, because I really do want to do some writing for them and come up with some scenarios. I mean, you talk about Wrecking Ball Legursky. This was a kid that was the biggest Assault Championship fan when he was a kid, and I remember him being 16 years old while I was doing hardcore matches at Riders with Zombie, and him telling me I'm going to be a wrestler one day, and me going, kid, you want nothing to do with this business, you know, nothing. And I'm so happy that he's doing it.
Well, Bulldog, it was a pleasure seeing you.
Yeah, we could sit here for hours talking.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll talk to you again. We got to wrap things up right now.
You saw on the screen Kayfabe Kickout. Go read my articles, comment on them.
Read them. I'll comment on them.
Have a nice vacation next week, sir.
KayfabeKickout.com. Yes,
nice
yes.
vacation
I won't be here
week,
next
sir.
week.
I will.
Me and you, Hollywood.
We can handle it.
Thank you very much,
Come
sir.
back anytime,
no problem,
buddy.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate the
Bulldog,
appreciate the
offer once again.
Thank you.
We need another hour.
Good night and good luck.
That went by like